Welcome to the next panel session, Activate the Metadata to Empower Innovation. I want to thank MANTA for sponsoring this important event today. In the last 20 years, the number of systems companies are using is on the rise, especially in the areas of big data, AI, and machine learning technologies. More systems, their connection, maintenance, and testing results at higher costs. To navigate through the chaos of data, the companies need to activate their metadata to help map the data environment and understand it better. So let me introduce Jan Ulrych, who's the Vice President of Research and Education at MANTA, who will discuss active metadata and why it's the future of data maintenance. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jan. Thank you again, and look forward to an informative panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Eric. And welcome everyone. So let's get into it. Why activating metadata and how it really helps. For a long time, it was the bigger the company was, the easier it was for it to be successful. And as the world is changing, the secret ingredient to success nowadays is the ability to actually innovate quickly, rather than being big. Being able to fastly react to customers' feedback, to their requests, being able to introduce new products and services quickly to the market, fast to react to the current situation. That's really what's making a company successful nowadays. And this ability is actually, the picture somewhat suggests that, the ability to react fast is characteristic, especially for smaller companies. And it's actually quite obvious. They do not have the baggage of a long history, complex environment, lots of historical services that would be impeding their response capabilities, right? However, if that small company is successful, it grows. And today's session is really about, as the company grows, how can we, how it can keep this flexibility to innovate, to react fast, even throughout the growth. And for the large organizations that already are big, how to actually gain this flexibility back. So, I actually borrowed this quote from a recent Gartner report. And that actually explains why we are talking about metadata today. And it actually shows that only 10% of time of data engineers, data scientists, are spent on the actual work that they are supposed to do, on the innovation, right? So just half a Monday out of the week is spent on the work that they are supposed to do. The rest is spent on sort of supporting activities that are not directly related to that person's job, right? Large parts of that is actually looking up metadata, gathering it, correcting it, validating it. All of this is consuming a large amount of those 90%. And this is actually very consistent with what EDM's Council very own DCAM, Data Capability Assessment Model, says. In that model, it is apparent that the biggest gap, the biggest step that the organization needs to take on the maturity level is from developmental to defined scoring, right? And one of the key aspects to this step is actually having metadata, having data lineage, all of the documented, captured, validated, and so on. So that's really the motivation behind today's presentation, why we are talking about metadata. So briefly about agenda, let's first actually talk about how we got into this stage, why metadata is taking something between 50 and 90% of time for data scientists. Let's very briefly talk about metadata and how to actually activate it, what it really means. And then I would like to focus on one very specific type of metadata, which is data lineage, and show how it helps in activating the whole metadata environment. So Why is it really that 90% of the time is spent on data preparation and lookups and metadata validation? Well, it's because our data environments are complex, and they are getting more complex every day. 40 years ago, we had just our primary systems supporting our day-to-day business operations. That was simple times. In the 90s, we realized that we could use data better. We could use the data to drive our business. And we started introducing things like data warehouses for analytics, right? Fast forward into more recent years, the demand to better serve our customers with new platforms such as internet, social networks, social media, require more analytics to be able to introduce new content, new services, better react to the customer needs. And with that, we really need to understand the customer's behavior. And we are introducing even more advanced stuff like data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on. And with all of this, whether we like it and realize it or not, our environments are getting more and more complex. There are more and more connections between individual systems that create dependencies. And that's exactly what our data engineers, data scientists have to struggle with. We've done a lot on the data space about the improvements, data operations, and so on. But on the metadata space, we have not actually done too much, even though the complexity of our environment actually increased incredibly. So this is exactly what makes the organizations slower as they grow. And it actually makes them spend more time on keeping up with their own internal environment, less than actually innovating. And in fact, our data scientists, data engineers often are going into their job sort of blind, because in many cases, these environments are so large that not a single person is familiar with the whole environment. So in the end, in some degree, this environment actually becomes a black box. Really, for a data engineer, it's a black box. They don't understand what happens there. So what they would really need is something like a map. They would need a map to the environment. And metadata is that sort of a map for data, right? Just very briefly to introduce metadata, data scientists typically runs into a situation where they work with the actual data. So there's some data record that they are supposed to use. But in order to use it, they need to interpret it, right? They need to understand it. So some of the elements are quite easy to understand. Name, probably my name, obvious, right? But if you look at the others, it's not so easy. Activation date, what does it mean? Is it activation date of that account or of particular service, right? We don't know. Even worse is active column. What does the T mean? Is it T as true or T as terminated or something completely different, right? We need additional information, or data engineers need additional information to actually understand what that record represents and how to work with it. But this descriptive information is not the only thing. We need to understand if this is a raw record or if it has been cleansed, right? Is there any personal identifiable information in there? When was it refreshed? Where did it come from? All of this information is extremely critical to be able to use, to work with the data efficiently. So let's actually use the map that I started with as an analogy here, actually the paper map. If we provide our data engineers with the metadata, this metadata can serve as a map to our data environment. In many cases, our data engineers do not even have the complete metadata, and they sort of need to draw the map as they go, right? So they are really going blind into the job. So the map is great first step if we have the metadata. But then if we take this analogy a little bit further, how many of us is still using map to navigate? Aren't there better ways to do it? Well, there are. most of us are actually using GPS navigation today, right? And you can think of this GPS navigation as an activated map. And let me explain what I mean by that. There are actually, if you use the paper map, you need to follow the route that you planned. And if you make a wrong turn, you need to stop and see how to fix it, right? With GPS navigation, it works differently. GPS gives you instructions. It tells you turn left, go straight, turn right. And all of these instructions are based on our current location. If we make a wrong turn, it automatically recalculates the route and gives us new instructions. We don't need to do anything. We can just continue driving and wait till it recalculates, right? It even factors in the current traffic to choose the best route and so on. And that's exactly what we need to do with our metadata. Not just make the metadata available to our data engineers in form of a paper map, if you will, but we actually need to activate them to give them something like the GPS metadata so that it actually actively helps them, so that it's not them who need to be active in using that metadata, but the metadata itself or the processes around that use the metadata give us or them suggestions, hints, alerts, same as the GPS nav does for the driver, right? So just to sum up, before we go into a particular example, active metadata is really metadata available in a form that allows the metadata to be used in the data-related processes to provide these hints, alerts, suggestions, or even make decisions. And this is a huge change compared to how we understood the role of metadata up to now. Up to now, the farthest that we got with metadata was basically a mere catalog, right? Catalog that is available and anyone can go in, search, explore, navigate, but that was it. We need to change this. We need to really activate the metadata. For the actual deployment, the actual activation means that we need to revise and digitalize the processes that we currently have. And keep in mind that having a data catalog that actually is in digital form, and you as a user or data engineer as a user goes in and navigates through it, explores it, is not having that process truly digitalized, right? The idea is that we need to actually modify, revisit, redefine the processes, the existing processes, to actually actively use the metadata that we have available and use the suggestions or hints provided by the metadata to the user, right? And this is all very abstract. So let's take a look at a very concrete example of a data quality process and how that can be improved with active metadata. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'd like to focus on a very particular type of metadata, which is data lineage. It's going to be very crucial here in this data quality example. So let me introduce it briefly. Most of you are probably very familiar with the concept of data lineage because EDM's consensus models such as DCAM or CDMC, the data capability assessment model, and cloud data management capabilities are including data lineage as one of the critical capabilities there. But in a nutshell, data lineage gives you information about how the data flows through your data pipelines. It shows where the data comes from, where it originates, where it is distributed to, and how it is used, along with all the transformations and messaging that happens to the data along the way. And that's really critical capability to actually allow us maintain the dependencies of our environments that are getting more and more complex. That's basically the paper map of our environment, and we need to activate it to make it better. So let's take a look at that data quality in this investigation process. And I'll start with the traditional approach and then show you how it can be changed with the activated metadata. So for a long time, I had a problem with my bank who was sending me the new credit card on the original mailing address that I provided when I opened the account. I fixed the address I changed the address when I moved through the internet banking, but 2 or 3 years later, when the credit card expired and they were sending me a new one, it again arrived to the original mailing address. So I did it again, didn't work. So this is typical kind of data quality issue. And when someone starts looking into it, it's typically assigned some identifier like this DQ1425. And the data quality steward needs to actually investigate why the system that actually prints the envelopes and the letters that are being sent has the wrong email address or the mailing address. Well, first of all, they need to understand where the data came from, right? It's not directly entered into the system usually. So typically there is some path, some data pipelines that push the data from the original sources into the actual system, right? Second, we need to really identify the actual sources. So there was the original contract that I signed and provided the mailing address. And there was also the internet banking that I used to change my email address to. So we need to understand the sources. Next, since there are multiple sources, there must be some point that actually decides which address is actually going to be printed on that letter. Right? So there's some decision logic, some filtering or transformation, or just a decision which of the addresses is more reliable, more recent, more accurate, anything like that. Maybe there was a failure or some breakage in the process that actually caused the new mailing address not to be transferred to the target system, right? And maybe someone hasn't, or no one actually has noticed this breakage, or at least didn't fix it, right? So all of these are issues that need to be investigated and identified when we're actually looking into this data quality issue. But even further, if we got some information about potentially incorrect data being somewhere down the stream, or upstream, actually, I'm sorry, we may want to actually identify who else is using this data, because this original report for the credit card mailing address printing is not the only one. There may be other uses of the data for other reasons. And these may be actually very important, because they may actually increase, or on the other hand, decrease the priority of this data quality issue and better assess the impact on the business as a whole, right? So all of this information needs to be gathered, and without the map, it can easily take weeks or months, depending on people availability, depending on how large the environment is, to actually gather all of this information. If we have metadata available, if we have data lineage, if we have the other sources, we can actually probably make this process much faster, and it can be shortened to, I don't know, hours, days, again, depending on how large that environment is, how much of the metadata you have access to, and how much of it you can collect, right? But if you think about it, all of this that I explained, we didn't actually fix the issue. We didn't even start. We were just collecting the information about what's wrong with our environment, so that we can actually start fixing it. So we spent weeks, days, or weeks really not providing any results, right? And that's exactly the issue that we're dealing with, and that we want to fix. If you think about it, all of what I explained was basically going through some metadata that could be very nicely automated. So how could the activated metadata approach to the data quality could look like? Well, pretty simple. We need to adjust the data quality process itself so that it automatically uses the metadata that is available, evaluates it and generates adequate notifications based on the metadata, recommendations, and if we have enough information, it can even make decisions or even correct some of the data or processes. And all of this information that you see on this slide is actually simply reformatted into a data quality issue dashboard, all of the information from the previous slide that we already had. So the idea is that the data quality steward that is investigating that issue is actually simply presented with all of the information, with all of the findings, with all of the metadata related to this specific issue. And the process already provided some hints, right? It provided hints about the source data assets, where the data is actually coming from, about interesting points in the data pipeline, about the transformations. If the data is just moved over, that's probably okay. But if there are transformations, that could be a potential root cause of the issue. With any sort of incidents that happened on these particular paths that are affected, right? And so on and so on. It can even give you a summary of your data quality metrics or potential information about any sort of changes that happened to your data pipelines in past few months that could again lead to these issues potentially. The reason why I started with the data lineage is that data lineage really enables all of this investigation to be automated, because it gives you that map. It gives you the links that can be automatically followed and collect additional pieces of metadata if needed be, right? So with this approach, instead of weeks or months or even days, using the metadata by the users, by the exploration, this whole process of actually assessing the data quality issue can be shortened to basically minutes or hours at most, because you have all information available at hand and you can start focusing on investigation immediately. So this is an example how activating metadata can look like in case of data quality process, but you can imagine very similar things around data privacy, for example, or data security, and others. So how does really MANTA fit in, and why I'm talking about this topic? Well, the reason is that in order to be able to activate the metadata, it won't happen on its own, right? You need some platform that actually captures the metadata, or even better, discovers the metadata and its dependencies on a very granular level, on very accurately, so that you can really use the automation to build on top of it, right? If you have incomplete or not accurate metadata, then any sort of automation that you do is likely not going to work well, and you'll need the human input again to sort of correct it or complete it, right? So MANTA is actually one of those platforms that actually allow you to gather the metadata, collect it, harvest it, especially focused around data lineage. But even better, it actually can generate alerts and run continuous analytics to actually identify interesting events that can be used to trigger the other processes and systems through APIs or embeddable widgets. So we have a few minutes left. It's time for summary. So key takeaways is really that the active metadata, from my perspective, is really the future of data management and key functionality for data scientists, for data engineers to really be productive. At the same time, it's a way for companies to stay or become very flexible in terms of responsiveness to to innovation and introducing new products, new capabilities to their customers. And especially today, if you look at the enormous shortage of people in the IT sector, it's critical that companies cannot afford to waste their time on routine activities that can be automated or that simply do not bring any value on their own unless you actually complete the whole process and make sure that the time to market is short. So that's all from my side, and we have a few minutes for questions. So if there are any, let me go through the list that I see here on the screen. Can we get the slides? Absolutely. I believe that they should be available on the EDM console or actually DataVision site. If not, then definitely here are the contact information to MANTA. So feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to send them or discuss in more detail. Any other questions from anyone? A question from Laurie. Can you speak to how your incorrect address would be handled in the MANTA solution? Absolutely. Yeah, great question. So the idea is that the data quality steward who would be investigating the reason, the root cause for that address not to be properly populated would not have to go through the whole path of the data pipeline and investigate sort of step by step what went wrong, or if actually something went wrong in what place. They would be presented with the dashboard that I've shown with the interesting points, and that way they can actually see all that information available, collected, and they sort of get a bigger picture and complete picture of the data flow to make sure that they don't forget about anything. Ideally, obviously the question is, what was the root cause? If it was some failed transfer on particular day, that's something that they could have identified immediately and see how to fix it, how to re-push that data over, and how to prevent these issues from happening in the future, right? So the fact that they would be presented with all the information at the very first glance when they are assigned the issue is the key here to make sure that they do it really thoroughly and completely. It's not clear, question from Roger, it's not clear whether you ingest information from Colibra or provide it. So in case of MANTA specifically, we focus on harvesting metadata, especially data lineage from code, from database procedures, from ETL tools, from reporting tools, and linking it all together to provide you sort of end-to-end view of your data pipelines. When it comes to Colibra, we actually push this information into Colibra to provide the complete lineage information for data governance reasons. And I believe that we are up. So the next ones start basically now. There are two options. Both of them are interesting. So please pick the one that you're interested in, and you can. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. Thank you very much for joining, and have a great day.